Talking today about a classic, originally published in 1908. This is The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. And as I'm sure you already know, it's the adventures of four animal friends: Rat, Mole, sometimes also known as Ratty and Moley, Badger, and Toad. And it's been adapted many times, and I am almost certain that more people are familiar with the adaptations than the actual book, or at the very least, most of us encountered the adaptations as children first. That was definitely true for me. In my case, as I think in the case of many Americans, my primary association with The Wind in the Willows was the Disney cartoon from 1949. Which was originally released as The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad as a double feature, but was later re-released as either The Adventures of Mr. Toad or The Wind in the Willows. As I've mentioned on this channel a few times before, I was raised on Disney cartoons as a child. I wasn't allowed to watch regular TV, but we were allowed to watch Disney, so I absorbed all those cartoons, and saw it several times over as a child, and I still think it's the slapstick at the end of that movie where they have the fight in Toad Hall is some of the best Disney slapstick ever. However, in my travels abroad, when I've talked to people from Great Britain or the United Kingdom, I've discovered that for people in Great Britain, their primary association with this movie was a TV show which was run in the 1980s in Britain. I'm talking, of course, about people my own age. For British people my own age, there was a TV show that was on in the 1980s that was... I never heard of it. I don't think it got released in the US, but it was very influential for them. So let me know in the comments down below what your first encounter with this story was, and also let me know what your first encounter with the book was. In my case, I think my mother gave me a copy of the book round about 4th grade. She knew I was a fan of the Disney cartoon. She said, "You'll probably enjoy the book as well." I got, I don't know, maybe 5 pages into the book, and then I just stopped reading it. And it stayed on my shelves for years, but I was never able to get back into it. It just bored me as a child. I think I wasn't quite ready for it. But I picked it up again in my mid-30s for a couple of reasons. I had heard some talk from some people about what a funny book it was. And I had heard some talk about what a beautiful book it was. And I know those are two kind of different recommendations, but I got curious to check it out myself, and I got from a used bookstore a copy of the 1988 edition published by Tor Publishing, and read it on a beach trip over one weekend, and as an adult, I found it was a very quick read. As quite often happens, right? There are books you struggle with as a kid. You wait a few years and you come back to them as adults and you're like, oh, this is the easiest thing to read ever. But at the same time, I can see why it didn't grab me when I was a kid. So if you've not read the book but are familiar with the adaptation, it may surprise you to learn that there's a significant part of the book that doesn't deal with Mr. Toad. So the Disney adaptation, of course, is all about the misadventures of Mr. Toad. And I think lots of adaptations are about Mr. Toad and Toad Hall and his obsession with motor cars. But that's actually, excuse me, I got a bit of a frog in my throat. That's only actually part of the book. There's a significant part of the book which is just about the friendship between Ratty and Moley. And it's written in kind of a humorous, whimsical style, which as an adult, I pick up on the humor better than I did as a kid. And I know it was originally written to be a kid's book, but, it was written in 1908. The style was different then. It was before television, etc. Anyways, point being, I pick up better on the whimsical humor style, or the subtle humor, is what I want to say. I pick up better on the subtle humor of the prose as an adult. The initial chapters are very simple in terms of the plot. So, for example, one chapter is about Rat and Mole going on a boating expedition for the first time. Mole is fascinated by how well Ratty works the boat. He wants to try it himself. Ratty won't let him, etc. That's kind of one chapter. Another chapter is Ratty and Mole looking for Badger's house and getting lost in the woods. Another chapter is Mole remembering his old house and wanting to revisit his old house, which he has since abandoned when he went to live with Ratty. Just talking about how Mole has got very homesick for his old house. Etc. These early chapters are very simple in their storylines. And I was wondering to myself whether simple stories are best for children, or maybe they're best for adults. There's a temptation, isn't there, to say that, well, it's a children's story, so these nice, simple plot lines are best. But then I thought, remembering what kind of stories I liked to read when I was in second grade and third grade or fourth grade, or, around about that age, I didn't like a simple mundane story. I liked a fantastical adventure story. Especially maybe for boys. That's the kind of story that I think grabs them. Maybe a story with a more simple plot line is better appreciated by adults, maybe. And then there are a couple chapters here which really seem to be aimed more at adults. There's one chapter which seems to me to be quite explicitly about a middle-age crisis. So the character Ratty encounters a sailor rat who has sailed all over the world and has stories from every port town. And Rat has a moment of crisis when he begins to wonder about the road not taken and if he's missed out on having an adventurous life. And he almost packs up his things and goes out to see the world. But his friend Mole talks him down from it. And Mole talks him down from it by just gradually bringing the conversations around to the pleasures of the English countryside life. And sure, Ratty hasn't seen the world, but he's got a nice peaceful life here with all the joys of the changing of the seasons and the peacefulness of the countryside and all the smells and sensations of what his life is like here. So he comes to realize that his life is quite rich even though he hasn't had all those adventures. That seems to me to be a story about a middle-aged crisis and kind of coping with it. And the author, Kenneth Grahame, was middle-aged when he wrote this book. A little bit depressing to say, but he was about my age, a couple years older when he wrote this book, but not much older. According to the publisher's introduction by Jane Yolen, which is in the Tor 1988 edition of this book, he was actually having a middle-age crisis when he wrote this book, and he was suffering from some depression, which he was working through in the chapters of this book. And then there's another chapter when Ratty and Moley go out to meet the god Pan, the god of nature Pan. And it's a beautiful written passage. And according to Wikipedia, this passage has often been the source of inspiration for artists. So you can search and you can see many different artist renditions of Ratty and Molly meeting the nature god Pan. But again, I'm not quite sure it's written for children, and especially the way it's written. It's written not with a sense of joy, but almost with a painful nostalgia for something lost. I don't know, the lost innocence, or the loss of childhood, or the loss of nature. So again, these kind of strong emotions seem to me to be less suited for a child. On the other hand, there are the Mr. Toad scenes. And I don't want to give the impression that this book is all emotion and no fun. About half the book is given up to Mr. Toad and his hijinks. So these Mr. Toad chapters are much faster paced, much better paced for a child, and they tend to follow a child's logic. So for example, Mr. Toad escapes from the police, and then he has to run from them, but then once he gets back home, he's safe, as if, like, you know, the police can't touch you once you get back home. Or the Weasels and the Stouts take over Toad Hall, and Ratty, Molly, Toad, and Badger have to take it back, and they're outnumbered. There's only 4 of them against like an army of Weasels and Stoats, but they're able to do it by a surprise attack, kind of surprising and scaring the Weasels and the Stoats out of Toad Hall. Now, from the adult logic, you think, okay, well, once the Weasels and the Stouts realize they've been routed, they've been surprised and tricked, there's nothing to prevent them from just regrouping and going back in and retaking Toad Hall, right? They've got the greater numbers. But the logic seems to be, once you're out of the house, then the game is up and you've lost and you've got to abide by it. And not surprisingly, I guess, according to the publisher's introduction by Jane Yolen in 1988, some of these sections of The Wind and the Willows originated separately. So the Toad stories, and you know, Toad and his obsession with motor cars, and Toad having to retake Toad Hall from the Weasels, these were stories that Kenneth Grahame had been telling to his 4-year-old child as a way to entertain him before bed, or apparently these were letters he would write to his child when he was away on a boating expedition. And so those stories originated first, and then later, when he was putting together this in book form during the form of a midlife crisis, those other chapters, the more emotional or sentimental chapters, came about then. So the publisher's introduction of the Tor books by Jane Yolen has a quote here which seems to sum up the experience of reading this book very perfectly to me. So I'm going to read this quote. It says, "The Wind in the Willows is not one book, but 3. So there is the contemplative, pastoral, sentimental, and nostalgic story of those best of old-fashioned friends, Rat and Badger and Mole. There is the rollicking adventure of the irrepressible and trouble-minded Toad, and there is the mystical, magical, even visionary and dreamlike allegory of Pan, allegory of Pan with his pipes at the gate of dawn. Some readers prefer the story of friendship, some prefer the fast-paced adventure, some prefer the dream." To me, it almost seems like there are elements of the story, elements of this book, which can appeal to children, but I'm not sure the book as a whole appeals to children. And it almost seems to me like the kind of book which is better enjoyed as an adult than as a child. And maybe that's just my own bias, because I didn't enjoy it as a child and I enjoyed it as an adult. But that's the way it seems to me. But take my opinion with a grain of salt, because I have asked several friends about their experience of this book, both online and in person, talked to other people who have read it. And a lot of other people reported to me that they read this book as a child and enjoyed it. Or in some cases that they read it to their children when their children were young and their children enjoyed it. So I could be just an outlier. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Did you read this book? How old were you when you read it? Did you enjoy it? Do you think this book is suitable for children? Did you enjoy it when you were a child, etc.? It's always interesting for me to check my impressions against other people to see how far off the mark I am. But before I end this review, I do need to... Sorry, I'm trying to choose my words here. What do I want to say? I want to say that I can't possibly end this review without talking about the humor in this book. Because there is a lot of delightful humor in this book. And as I said, some of it is kind of subtle humor or a little ironic humor that I appreciate better as an adult. The Mr. Toad scenes, of course, are more slapstick humor. But it's been called one of the classic humorous books in the English language, and I think with good reason. There's a lot of funny little parts to this book. I won't go into all of them, but it's definitely one of the pleasures of reading this book. Another thing which is very interesting in reading this book is just maybe the descriptions of domestic life in Edwardian society. And it's, you know, like I alluded to before, it's a bit of a homely book. It talks about, I mean, it's talking animals, but these, you know how these books go. The animals kind of live in little houses like people, and they have cozy little houses. And, you know, one of the things that struck me when I was reading this book is just how important the fireplace was during the winters of these times. There's, you know, they go out in the snow and they come in all cold, but they warm up by the fireplace with a cup of warm ale. And, you know, I mean, we still have fireplaces, we still have warm drinks, but not quite as essential, since electricity and central heating has changed everything. But it's just, yeah, interesting to see how the cozy winter life in these houses is described here. So yeah, it's to sum up, if you're an adult and you haven't read this book yet, it's a definite recommend. Like I said, I have some ambivalence about whether or not the supposed target audience for this book, children, whether it's actually suitable for children. But definitely, as an adult, it's a easy read, a pleasant read. Make sure to check it out if you haven't yet. And if you have checked it out, let me know what you thought of it.